Hi, it's the Pro and Con Show, and my name's Michael James Ott, and I'm your host. So back in the 2020 timeframe, I did a bunch of Pro and Con shows. They were around 15, 20 minutes, and I talked a lot about some of the issues, which many of them still faces today, unfortunately. And the intent was to try to give people little short videos where they could think about how the issues are and also how we're being manipulated by the media of all different types and social media and so on. And so I was pointing out how the media was impacting us negatively in many cases. Well, this one's different. This is going to be a totally different thing. And I can't emphasize enough a couple of things. So one is, what I'm about to talk about is very, very important. And it's not just important to me, it's important to all of us. And by us, I mean all of us normal, reasonable people. I call them the extraordinary, so-called ordinary people like you and I. And we'll talk a lot about that and how there's a small segment of humans that aren't like the vast majority of us. And so this is for all of us. And no matter where you sit, where you are around the globe, this is for you. So if you're, I'm sitting here in the United States of America, and of course I'm going to talk a little bit about America or more about America than other areas around the globe. But having said that, everything that I'm about to tell you, well, it's all true, and it's true for you. Whether you're in Syria or Uganda or Australia or North Korea or South Korea or here in the United States or in Russia or in Ukraine or any of the whatever hundreds of 180 countries or whatever there are acknowledged around the world. This is for you. And the other thing that I want to say is that, again, this is going to be a long video, very different than the short videos that I did some years ago. And it's really, as sure as there's a nose on your face, as sure as there's air on this planet to breathe, it's important that you hear what I have to say. And so, again, sit back, treat it like a podcast, and then at some point, if you believe in what I say, maybe ask your friends to listen to this also, and then the presentation is there. And you'll be able to flip through. And so if there's certain parts of what I'm talking about that you want to listen to, again, those images on the screen will help you find those words more easily. But it's not really important that you see the images on the screen. It's much more important that you listen to what I have to say. And I said earlier that everything I'm about to tell you is true, and that is true. And if at the end you say, well, that was a waste of time, or I don't believe what he said, whatever, it's not that what I'm telling you is not true or worthwhile. It will be a result that I will have failed you miserably. And I really hope and pray that I don't fail you miserably. So this Pro and Con show is about Citizen Statesmen, and it's the cure for what ails us. The cure for what ails us. And so I'm going to talk about, and the reason why it takes a few hours is to talk about kind of how we got here and why we're here. And then the best part, There's solutions. We can solve and resolve our problems. We can do it. You and I can do that. So this is the cure for what ails us. Okay? Citizen Statesmen, the cure for what ails us. So back in 2016, and so I have to admit, I was just about as apathetic as anybody possibly could have been for a huge part of my life. And, because, okay, who cares? It just didn't seem like it was going to be that much difference, Gore versus Bush or, Clinton versus or whatever. Back, 20, 30 years ago, Reagan and all those guys. But in 2016, it was Clinton versus Trump. And anecdotally, and even in the various polls that I saw from various media channels, you interviewed Americans, and it was a really high percentage, like over 95% of us disliked one candidate or the other to a great degree, or both. I was in the category of both. I disliked both candidates for president in a really big way. I did not like either one of them. And like so many of us, we ask ourselves the question, well, there's 340 million people roughly in the country. How did we end up with these two people as our choice for arguably the most important position in the country, if not the world? And so I was, and then, so that got me to thinking. And as I thought more about it, I thought to myself, there's a bigger question, and that is, you can feel, most people, if you're watching this video, if you've lived anywhere in the world, most places around the world, you're feeling like something is changing and not for the better. There's something happening. And so this in this country anyway, there's kind of a general upward trend. Okay, there was occasional, downturns or whatever, but generally an upward trend. And now it just feels like that trend is downward. It feels like that trend is downward. And the problems that we have and the difference between, what the have and have-nots have is growing, and so the real question then was, why is this happening to us? Because it seems like us, the extraordinary, ordinary people, we're not the governance, the people that we're having, in charge of our lives on a large scale. They're not doing what we want them to do. And so the big question is, why? Why are we, that number in the billions and billions and billions around the world, why are we allowing ourselves to be exploited or trod upon or, certainly very poorly served by the people that we have, basically administering our society, if you will, so our governments and so on? Why? And the big answer is narsoles. Again, the big question, why? The big answer, narsoles. Well, many of you, in all fairness, are probably thinking, what or who are narsoles? What or who are narsoles? Well, they're not what's. They're humans. They're bags of bones, walking around the planet like the vast majority of us. They're narcissistic. Okay, this is a fancy word for meaning that they're completely self-absorbed. They care about themselves. They want, to expand their wealth and influence and power. That's what they exist for. And they want to, everyone to praise them and, listen to them and do exactly what they say because they are narcissistic. Okay? Totally self-absorbed, self-consumed. And they're sociopathic, meaning that they have no empathy or compassion for anyone else. Okay, which makes sense. If you're extremely narcissistic, you're also, you just don't give a crap about anybody else or anything else other than yourself. So you're narcissistic, sociopathic, and honestly, what I don't know, surely, it's a small percentage of the population. We'll talk about that in a moment, but you know some of these people. You know them. And they're narcissistic, they're sociopathic, and they're assholes. They're assholes. Okay? Narcissistic, sociopathic assholes, and if you add that all up, they're narsoles. That's where the term comes from. And why do I coin the term narsoles? Because it's much more effective and efficient to say narsoles over and over and over again, because you know what I mean now, instead of narcissistic, sociopathic assholes. Narcissistic, sociopathic assholes. That's a lot of words, a lot of syllables, and a lot of writing. They're narsoles. Okay? Our problem is narsoles. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, I mentioned earlier that the narsoles in our lives, in our society, it's a small percentage of us, a tiny wedge of the overall pie here. So you see, the vast majority of us, clearly for sure, greater than 95%, maybe greater than 97, 98% of us humans are extraordinary, so-called ordinary people. And we'll talk a lot about that and how we differ from narsoles in the future in this presentation. But we're the extraordinary, ordinary people like you and I. And the vast, 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 vast majority of us are like us. And the narsoles are a tiny, teeny, tiny wedge of the pie. They're a teeny, tiny percentage, for sure less than 5%, maybe less than 3 or even 2% of us. But we've had to deal with these narsoles for years, right? So they're not like the vast, 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 vast majority of us who are, pretty darn good people. We're fairly reasonable, reasoned, fairly compassionate, fairly honest, fairly helpful. All of these things, and I want to emphasize this because, when you think about your friends, your family, your neighbors, your coworkers, what's true about all those people? Well, they're, okay, there's a spectrum. Okay, and you don't agree on some things. And a lot of that, by the way, is caused by the narsoles who try to drive wedges between us and by the media outlets that try to limit the information that you receive to for their benefit for various reasons. But if you think about it, we're pretty good and nice to each other and stuff like that. And again, I'll talk about why that is and why that's kind of an inherent thing for us in a little while in this presentation. But so we've got the vast majority of us, fairly reasoned, reasonable, honest, compassionate, helpful people, plus minus. And then you've got the narsoles. Well, what has been, excuse me, historically, the role of the narsoles in human history? What has been the role of the narsoles? Well, of course, they're horrible people, right? And these are people that you don't want them, being scout leaders, and you don't want them to be teachers, and you don't want them to be policemen, and you don't want them to be, there's many of the things that you and I would want and depend on in our society. We don't, you don't want them as our doctors or whatever. So there's one category of them that we've been dealing with, and our prisons are full of them. And this is the people that are murderers and rapists and serial killers and fraudsters and other arsonists and folks like that. Okay, so those narsoles really either lack the capability of broad communication, or they just lack the desire to do that, and so they focus on hurting and exploiting small numbers of us extraordinary, ordinary people. They murder us, they rape us, okay? They defraud us, steal, all these kinds of things, right? But there's another category of narsoles that we don't really pay too much attention to, or not enough attention to. And maybe it's because, maybe until just now, maybe you've never thought of these people in the way that you should be. There's another category of narsoles, and these are the people that have skills in communicating with the public and trying to influence larger groups of people. These are the people that make great speeches, and maybe they're entertaining, okay, and they claim all kinds of things. So they're people like cult leaders and autocrats and elected officials and CEOs and political party pundits and. So these people, instead of being focused on small numbers of people to harm, they're focused on large numbers of people, millions and even billions of people. These are the people that they're attempting to harm by exploiting them for their own benefit, exploiting us, the extraordinary, ordinary people, for their own benefit, because that's who narsoles are, and that's what they do. They exploit people around them for their own benefit. They exploit for their own benefit. And so how have they managed to do this? How do they get us, me, you and I, how do they get us to do things that are not in our best interest? How do they manage to do it? Well, there is a great book that was written by a professor. His name is Harari. And the title of the book is Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. And this book is great. This book is great because it takes us, if you read the book, it takes us through the history of humankind. So thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, a few thousand years ago, some hundreds of years ago, and now today. And what you see when you think about and follow, it's a very well-written, very objective view of what humans and where we came from. And so a lot of our behaviors today this is the important point, a lot of behaviors for us today are driven by things that we went through as a species thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. And this book has many kind of categories of those kinds of things. But I'm only going to focus on 4. So thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, we roamed around in fairly small groups, 20, 30 people perhaps. I don't know that we're sure how big they were, but they weren't huge. So fairly small numbers of people in tribes, basically. Okay, so these roaming groups of humans, and we were hunter-gatherers. So we're going around and they're doing their best to catch and kill, whatever it is, animals that they could eat, dig up tubers, so that they could eat some of the roots. Of course, they had to find water to drink, and this is what life was like, okay. And so you had these groups, fairly small groups. And of course, it's kind of life or death. This is your not, the difference on a daily basis between you surviving and dying was, it was a thin line. Okay, there wasn't a lot of extra food around and things like that. And so one of the things that happened, of course, is that you'd be roaming around and perhaps you'd come across another tribe of humans, and things are tough generally, and so you're kind of competing for some of the same resources, especially if you're living in similar areas or areas that are borders between the tribes, and so you could have conflicts. Well, what is true about the tribe for you if you're a member of the tribe? Well, you are being protected by the tribe, and you protect the other members of your tribe, and you do that because there's a system, a little social thing here, where some of you maybe gather and firewood and keep the fire burning, versus others that go find water, bring water to camp, or take the whole tribe to the water, and then hunt or fish or all these kinds of things, right? And so you work together as a team to help all of you survive, because it's almost always easier to have a group of people working together to make things better. And so and then you might have clashes with other tribes, and of course people would be hurt, you could be killed, and these kinds of things. So what's true about those tribes of people, the small groups, again, 20, 30, 40 people, whatever it was? Well, pretty darn obvious that they're going to be mostly like your family members, uncles, cousins, aunts, nephews, nieces, and so on, and second cousins, and but basically a lot of people that are kind of your family and literally like your family. Well, what's true about people and families? Well, generally they have a tendency to kind of look the same. Okay, some variation in tall or short, or thick or thin, or eyes, hair, and color of skin, but not a lot. So people kind of look more or less the same, and so you learn to trust, and over the course of time, it was a life or death thing, and you kind of trusted people that looked more like you because they helped protect you and you helped protect them, and when you did those things, you survived, and you had children, and they had children, and they had children, and they all did those things. And that's where, like, even today now, so you fast forward thousands and thousands of years to today, And in our modern world, with all of us going all over the world, and we've made this a small world after all, right? And so there's all kinds of people that grew up and lived. Originally their families were from many different regions around the world, but now we're co-located, and it's fine. And in fact, we get some benefits from, understanding the different cultures, and that gives different ideas, which helps, create, new things that perhaps are better than the old ones, and so on. But the point being that today, in our modern society, looking at someone and saying, well, that person looks like me, therefore I trust them, and that person over there doesn't look like me, and therefore I'm going to, chastise them or exploit them or something. That's not in our best interest, because we do so much better together, on the whole, working together, all of us contributing. And so you're like, well, wait a second, and I've had this conversation before, and the response is very often the same. Oh, I'm not racist, I'm not, that's it's crap. Well, so one of the other things about this presentation and this whole thing about Harari's book is it's really important that we're self-aware, because this is where the narsouls are using certain things, certain traits of us against us. Okay, and that's what they use to leverage to control and exploit us. So anyway, I just, and I'm not in any way inferring that everybody is racist or anything like that, but just to be self-aware. So here's an example. You're in a town, maybe you're traveling for some reason, and hey, you end up in the wrong place in town. It's a kind of a bad area, and you got separated from your car, and your car is, you think it's down the street over this way or whatever, and you're trying to get back to your car, and there's a street, and it's, doesn't look like the greatest place or anything like that. And as you walk down the street, you notice on the other side of the street, there's a group of people. Well, they look like they could be, kind of in a gang or something. They're making a lot of noise. They're projecting a lot of anger and things like that. And then you're thinking, well, then I'm going to say on my side of the street, and hopefully they'll say on their side of the street. But then you notice on your side of the street, there's another gang of folks, and they're kind of behaving in the same way. And now you're like, well, I'm one person against, 20 over here and 20 over there, and they don't look like they're very friendly potentially. I easily could get, mugged or whatever, right? Well, let's say that one of those gangs, looks a lot more like you as far as like the color of your skin or whatever than the other one does. So now you have to make a choice which side of the street you're going to walk on, because you got to eventually try to get to your car. So you're going to, kind of just walk past and hope they ignore you. You're going to try to ignore them. And you just hope that you survive. Well, there you are. And the reality is that probably even today, in that worst case scenario, you could easily be a little bit better off walking down the side of the street with people that kind of look more like you, because there's some racist pent-up anger out there, even today, of course. But if you look at it from the standpoint of the overall, and certainly outside of like a worst case scenario like that, that should not be your thought process. And you should be at least aware that, if you're talking to someone that looks significantly different than you, maybe they have tattoos, or the different colored skin, or they are speaking differently, or whatever. You need to be aware that you could be hesitant to trust them because they don't look like you. And we're going to talk in a little while about another trait that we have about being trustful. But we in our society, we do so much better if we mostly trust the people around us, because most of us actually are pretty darn trustworthy, regardless of the color of our skin, or how tall we are, short, tall, short, thick, or thin, well, all that kind of stuff. And so, is basically trust but verify kind of stuff, right? So that's one thing. So one of the aspects from behaviors from thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago that still impact us today in a mostly negative way in that particular case is, kind of having this inherent mistrust of people that don't look like us. There's another part, which is we can be gullible. We can be gullible. So you're like, okay, what do you mean by that? Well, again, thousands and thousands of years ago, there's a tribe of people, and there's generations in the tribe. And so some of the older people have much more experience, obviously. And so they try to communicate to the younger people and to other people that maybe don't have all their experiences, some of their experiences, and especially experiences on how to survive. So, let's say it was like during the Ice Age or something, there's saber-toothed tigers running around. And there's a small group of people in a certain tribe, they've had an experience where their tribe was attacked by a saber-toothed tiger, and they, figured out how to fend off the tiger. And now it's, they need to communicate that, and they need to do it effectively. And that's great. And it helps the tribe, of course, survive. And of course, it's the only way to do it back in the day was to tell stories, right? There were no tablets or newspapers or encyclopedias or computers or internet sites or any of that stuff. So if you're going to pass down critical information on survival, you're going to pass it down verbally and tell the story, right? And the stories that are most important are the ones where you faced some kind of really big issue. And so the stories that have maybe, some very dangerous things in them that instill fear, or maybe, you've been fighting and warring with a tribe nearby or whatever for a long time. So there's maybe some hate in there because, and so the people that paid attention to those stories that instilled hate and fear, well, they paid attention. And because they paid attention, they were able to survive. They, had more and more children. Those children had children, and so on. And so there's this inherent listening to stories, and especially stories that have like hate and fear and mistrust associated with them, because those are things to be avoided. And those are the things that we still to this day, pay attention to. But the reality is most of the stories in most of our lives, and certainly in many of the developed nations around the world, most of the stories, our daily stories, are pretty darn good stories. We got food pretty easy. We got water pretty easy. We got, clothing and stuff. It wasn't horribly hard to get many of the things that we need, especially compared to, hundreds and thousands of years ago. And so we're susceptible to stories that people tell that try to instill fear or hate. because that's how we kind of evolved, if you will, how we got to where we are, how we survived. But again, and then the other part is there's an appreciation for honesty in the story. So again, you're traveling around in a small group, and everyone has their things that they're doing, whether it's gathering firewood or trying to find food, or fishing, or all those kinds of things. And it's a team. And if individuals start lying to the rest of the team about the location of water, the location of food, or whatever, well, then again, you're living on kind of the knife's edge. And if they're lying and you go somewhere, you do something, you expend energy, and you don't get the water, you don't get the food, you don't get whatever, you can die. And so you come in a tribe to kind of be honest and truthful with each other, because it's kind of got to do that to survive. And so when somebody pretends that they're being truthful and honest, we can struggle with that. Us normal, extraordinary, ordinary people, we can struggle with that. It's, because most of us are pretty truthful and pretty honest, and when someone isn't that way, and that's why people who defraud us can be successful, right? Because we want to, and often do, trust people, and sometimes we trust them too much, or maybe they're just very clever, and they convince us that they should be trusted. But in any case, so we can be gullible and influenced by stories in ways that aren't to our benefit. So we talked about, we have some inherent potential racism, if you will. We can be gullible and influenced by stories that cause us to do things that aren't in our best interests. There's another part that us extraordinary, ordinary people have, and I touched on it a little bit before, but we are helpful to each other. And again, you think about a tribe, we're running around, walking around, climbing around, going around, roaming around, and we're trying to survive, right? Food, water, shelter, these are the things that we're constantly focused on. And someone slips and they fall down into a pit next to the path we're on. And they're not overly hurt, but they're down in the pit and they can't get out. Well, what do? Well, we go over there and help them out immediately, right? Why do we do that? Well, because they're part of our social fabric, and maybe they gather the water, or maybe they're, whoever they are in the fabric of our little tribe, they're an important part of it. And so you need them. They're a resource, because if you just leave them in the pit, then they are gone, and there's work that needs done, and they're not there to do their job, right? So again, for the accumulation and the long-term survivability of the tribe, you help each other. And this, fast forward to today, anecdotally. If you're in a major city, you're standing at a crosswalk, and someone starts stepping off the curb, and there's a bus coming. They don't see the bus or whatever. Hey, you grab them, you push them back or whatever. Hey, there's a bus, you don't jump out in front of the bus necessarily, but you're like, hey, man, watch out, there's a bus coming, okay? And, and if you think back on your lives, if you have of any age at all, and there's many cases where people have done, things for you, and you've done things for them. You did. They have, you have. For example, a little over a year ago, I was playing tennis with a friend, and there's some other people playing at some other courts in the same complex, but they're, we don't know any of them. We're not in a tournament or anything. We're just playing, he and I, on one end, and they're all down at the other end of the courts. And we're playing, and all of a sudden I went to get to a ball, and I totally misjudged, and I ran, and I not very athletic, don't have to raise his balance and everything. So, man, I just did a face plant, right into the tennis court, and I didn't even catch myself very well at all. So I'm every part of me is all scraped up, even my face. I was wearing sunglasses, and it looked like somebody had taken a grinder or something and ground off, a big part of the sunglasses. That's how badly I fell. And thank God they were there, because my face hardly got, damaged because of that. But anyway, so I'm laying there in a pile of blood and stuff. And nothing's broken, but I got scrapes and bruises and, stuff all over the place. And in just a minute, less than a minute, everyone else is around me. Hey, are you all right? Should I call 911? Do you need an ambulance? Do you think, have you hurt anything? Do you think you have any broken bones or anything? And other people are saying, oh, I've got a medical kit. You want me to go get some bandages and that kind of stuff? I can go get some bandages and things. And this is the kinds of things, and I do the same. And again, most of us extraordinary, ordinary people, this is the norm. Okay? We're helpful, honest people because, again, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, this is how we help survive. And now today, it's kind of an inherent thing in us to try to do those kinds of things, unless the narsoles have caused us to unreasonably hate our neighbors for no good reason, because they've had that terrible exploitive influence on us. Okay, and then the last thing, which is also a very, very important part of this, is that we are abstract thinkers. And Harari proposes that this is the reason why we have kind of leapfrogged, if you will, beyond the capabilities of most of the other species here on this planet, is we have this ability to think in abstract terms. We can think about a future that's 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years from now, and we can not only think about it, but we can really embrace it and start, thinking about, plan for it, right? So you plan for retirement or, all these kinds of things. So we have this ability to think abstractly. And that ability to think abstractly, helps us, because we can have a focus not on today, not is literally in front of us, but in these abstract notions about, what the future might hold or other things. And so this abstract thinking, so for example, it can really help us, because there's many times we can't actually do things. We can't experiment with them. We can't do them. We just have to think it through. So Einstein is famous for having what he called a thought experiment. So he's a physicist, and he's curious about what happens when things start moving at something close to the speed of light, and then the speed of light. And so he's pondering this, but there's no way. It's impossible to build experiments that are going to allow him to actually figure out or observe what happens to certain objects as they start approaching the speed of light. So he's got to just do this thought experiment thing. And he thinks about, okay, going faster and faster and faster and faster, and what that might mean, and the energy involved, and eventually he comes up with this relationship between energy and mass and the speed of light, the theory of relativity. And none of that would have been possible without this really good ability to abstract think. And we all think abstractly in many ways. Maybe you've got a goal, or you're, whatever age, maybe you're in high school and you think, well, maybe I should go to university or something. And so, okay, you start thinking abstractly because it's not there in front of you. There was a future and what that might mean, and can I go and do something that I would enjoy, and what does it take? And so we can think about different abstract ideas. And in fact, Harari is really good about, again, along that story arc, pointing out the miraculous things that humans have been able to do. Like the Egyptians built the pyramids. Okay, they used slave labor from various conquests, but the available tools back then were minimal compared to today. Today we could easily build the pyramids. It's not a problem with the equipment and tolerance tools and all these kinds of things, accuracy that we have with our machines, all that other stuff. We could build the pyramids very quickly and very efficiently. But thousands of years ago, we had none of those things. And because the Egyptians didn't really document very well how they actually built the pyramids, it's still something that people still ponder today. It's like, how did they manage to do it? And we come up with theories, and then they try to observe something on the pyramids to kind of prove or disprove a theory for how they're actually made. And so we got rid of, more or less completely rid the planet of leprosy, for example, and smallpox, and the list goes on and on and on. Kennedy, JFK, here in the United States back in the early 1960s, he proposed and implemented this idea that the United States, was going to somehow put a man on the moon in less than 10 years. And the important thing was there was hardly any work done up to that point to try to meet that goal. Yet he had the vision, he had this abstract thought, and he convinced our country, the United States, to pursue that. And he got a bunch of really great skilled engineers with that vision in mind to go that and make that happen. Much as I'm sure there were Egyptian engineers back in the day of the pyramids, where these some pharaoh or something said, well, I have a vision, I want this, and he instilled enough, whatever it was, in them to cause them to figure out how to make that happen. So we humans can collectively, literally do anything. Our capabilities, our abilities are truly limitless if we choose to work together. So again, back to the pyramids, if you had, nobody working together to do those things, there's no way they could build the pyramids. If you didn't have hundreds and thousands of different people working on the space programs and stuff like that, there's no way that there would have been astronauts on the moon. If you hadn't had a lot of different skills and people working on leprosy cures and so on, there's no way that we would have done all these things, built the skyscrapers. The list goes on and on and on. And so we are capable of anything, good or evil. So I want to have an aside here on that good or evil thing, because it's an important point. The Narsouls can be really, really, really bad people, and yet they can have a huge influence on millions and millions of people. So back in 2000, my employer sent me to live and work in Germany. And after I got there, shortly after I got there, a German colleague and I went to dinner together. And after dinner was over, he asked me a few questions about, living in the United States versus in Germany and what I thought. And so I spent a few minutes talking about the two countries, pro and con, good and bad, for and against. And after I finished, he leaned in across the table. We Germans, we watch your country very, very closely. And then with tears welling in his eyes, in a tortured voice, he croaked, "You know what we did to the Jews. You know what we did to the Poles. You know what we did to our own German people who spoke against the war. You know what we did." This place, the United Nations, do you know it? Do you know it? I shook my head. Yes, of course I know the United Nations. He said, this place cannot be here in Germany. It cannot be in France or the United Kingdom or Chile or China or even Canada. There is one place, where the world knows that the people can be counted upon to fight for and sometimes even die for. Freedom, equality, and fairness. And we Germans watch your country very, very closely. You see, of course, he was referring to World War II and one of the most famous narsoles of all time, Adolf Hitler. And I lived, amongst and worked amongst the German people for almost 3 years. My father's parents were German immigrants to the United States. All of them reasoned, reasonable, compassionate people. And yet, freedom, equality, and fairness disappeared in Germany. And it wasn't that long ago. And this is the kind of horrific exploitation. It's obviously one of the worst examples of it, but it is an obvious example of the exploitation that narsoles like Hitler, like countless others, which we'll talk about later in this presentation, and the sort of destruction and horror and death and famine and disease and that these people have caused. So Harari points out that we are so unbelievably capable, working together collectively. We are so unbelievably capable that the question isn't what do we want to do? The question is, what do we want to want? What do you want to want? That is how capable we are. The answer to that question is very different depending upon whether you're an extraordinary, ordinary person like me and the vast majority of us, the people that will ever view this video or listen to the audio, or whether you're a narsole. We, the people, the extraordinary, ordinary people, want freedom, equality, and fairness in tandem and in concert. Because that is how, over the course of the last decades, we have managed to do so many great things. The very best things happen when we promote and protect freedom, equality, and fairness in tandem and in concert. The very best things happen. And when we fail, when we allow the narsoles to exploit us, because the narsoles want to exploit our willingness to help and trust, and they exploit us for their own gain. And they've been wildly, wildly successful for centuries. Wildly, wildly successful. Genghis Khan, the Egyptian pharaohs, Roman empires, various kings, the British kings, other empires. You know, the list goes on and on and on and on over the arc of human history. If you want to read all about it, again, Harari's book, he goes through in some excruciating detail on some of those, all the things, all the narsoles that we've had in our past. By the way, he's never heard the term narsole until this presentation, I'm sure. But this is the truth. This is what has happened, and this is why we are the way we are today. And this is why the trend line is downward, because we have turned the corner. You and I have allowed the narsoles too much control, too much influence. They are exploiting us too much. And see, that's the one thing you'll see on the internet. You may have seen similar presentations or heard other people make similar complaints. But the thing that I've just gone through is not just here's the problems that we're feeling, but this is why it's happening. And then here's the best part. Here's the best part. Here's how we solve and resolve this issue. And we can. We need a cure for what ails us. And I have that answer for us. We have that answer for us. So again, as I explain certain things, before I can explain the answer, I have to explain. It's not a simple thing. I wish that the resolution to the complex issues that we face were like a few words on a bumper sticker. Oh, how wonderful that would be. But it's not true. It's not true. And those glad-handing, smiling assholes that tell you that, they're lying to you. They're exploiting your willingness to believe in their stories. So it's complex, but it's easily doable. And this is what we're going to do. So here's the key parts of the cure for what ails us. So first, we have to understand what the Constitution is. And there's dozens, of course, there's other democracies around the world. There's dozens of like-minded documents compared to the U.S. Constitution, right? But those documents and our Constitution, they're frameworks. They're frameworks. Envision, in your abstract thinking, a house with a roof on it, but no siding or drywall. So the walls are there, but they're just framed in walls. And if you turn sideways or whatever, you can kind of walk right through, right? Well, these documents, our Constitution and other similar documents, they're frameworks like that framed house with a roof on it. They're frameworks because it's really hard to envision all the things that might happen. And so people like you and I, we say, well, we want to protect this thing that we're trying for. We want to protect freedom, equality, and fairness because we realize that this is a great thing amongst us. Okay? And so, here's some frameworks. And by the way, we'll be just fine as long as we, the good people, realize that, well, what's the intent of the roof? The intent is to protect freedom, equality, and fairness. So we, the people that want to do that, we stay within the walls and we help protect it. And we wouldn't think of walking through, exploiting the holes in the framework to the detriment of freedom, equality, and fairness. We wouldn't do that, you and I. But the narsoles don't care about you. They care about themselves. And they see the holes in the framework as opportunities to exploit us. And they do. So we need good people, extraordinary, ordinary people in the framework for a better, effective democracy. The better the people in the framework, the better they're going to do at protecting freedom, equality, and fairness in tandem and in concert for all of us. But these days, because of our election systems, we have, basically almost all narsoles in our public offices. Our elected officials are almost all narsoles. And that's why the trend line is down. That's why things are going, to hell, if you will. Because we have so many bad people in our government that it's overwhelming these great principles that we've had and lived with for decades. So we need to rid ourselves of narsoles. We need to rid ourselves of narsoles. Now, how do we do that? So back in 2019, I got laid off. That's the last time I worked, so effectively I retired back in 2019. And we were out. There was so a bunch of us got let off, let go at the same time. And so we had a little going away thing, and we were at a restaurant / bar, a pub. And we're sitting around. There's dozens of employees that remained employed, and dozens of us that were being let go. And we're talking about what do you think you want to do next, and so on. Various people asking those questions. Of course, that was a hot topic for the evening. And I had a group of people. They were all asking me, what would be next for me. And I said, well, I'm done with what I've been doing. I think I'm going to be focused on trying to help our communities and our world be a better place in the future. Because I just feel like, and you guys, so this is 2019, you feel it, don't you? And everyone's like, yeah, it's really. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to be doing. All I know is I'm going to be trying to make things better, trying to do whatever I can to make things better for myself and my family and my friends and neighbors and the rest of us, for infinite generations. And so I said, well, there's like campaign finance reform, there's the gerrymandering reform, there's term limits, there's. And I said, I'm going to jump in with all these organizations. I'm not going to form my own or anything. That's a problem. We don't, these organizations, people put their name on everything, and it ends up with fragmented efforts like to cure cancer, for crying out loud. How many cancer foundations do we need? There's got to be hundreds of them, if not thousands of them. Anyway, so I'm going to throw in with that. Well, I was saying all that, and at a point, I kind of stopped talking. A friend of mine said, serving in our government should be like jury duty. Serving in our government should be like jury duty. And those words, it was an epiphany. It was a revelation. It was beyond belief in my mind how important those words were. Serving in our country should be like jury duty, because you see, jury duty, and so I don't know, I'm in my 60s now, and so it's been a long time since I went through my schooling and stuff like that. But back in the day when I went to school, there was 2 or 3 times in your schooling that you would talk about American government and the U.S. Constitution, and how well that was working and stuff like that, and how it worked and how we make it work. And I think all 2 or 3 times there was the teachers made a special effort to point out that jury duty is like this diamond in our Constitution. And why? Because unlike many other societies and stuff over the course of human history, if you got in some serious trouble of whatever form, you didn't have some emperor-appointed magistrate or the emperor himself, or a king or a tribunal or whatever decide your fate. If some real important thing was happening, you had the right to demand a trial by a jury of your peers, a jury of your extraordinary, ordinary peers. And this is the purest form, the most effective form of democracy, because you have reasonable, compassionate people that live the life like you do, judging whether whatever it is that is important in your life, it goes one way or another, whether you're being charged with a crime, or you're excuse me, trying to charge somebody else with a crime, or you're trying to get restitution for some horrible thing that somebody did to you. Right? It is a beautiful diamond. Now, in practice, like all things in a democracy, and in our democracy, and in the United States, there have been times where the jury system failed us. There was, because there was untoward racism or some other influence, or the influence of money or whatever. The jury might be influenced to do something that actually wasn't appropriate. But for all of those examples, and there are hundreds of them, I'm sure, over the history of the United States, there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of examples where the diamond, even with a few flaws in it, shone bright and sparkled, right? So jury duty is the purest form of effective democracy, because we have jurists. So for juries, we need jurists. And for government, we need citizen statesmen. So kind of the parallel of having jurists in our government. And again, we, the extraordinary, ordinary people, can do anything. We can do this. And I will explain how we can do this. And I also want to emphasize that failing to try is the problem. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, again, another experience. So I was in the U.S. Navy, and I was on a nuclear ballistic missile submarine, And my submarine was in dry dock. It was in overhaul, getting refitted. And in order for me to do some of the duties that I needed to do on board, I had to go on a different submarine, on one that was actively at sea, to get certain qualifications so I could come back and do my job with my crew. And so I went temporarily to another nuclear submarine, very similar to mine. And right after I got there, one of the crew members came up to me and said, "Oh, the captain's wanting to talk to you. He's in the officer's mess," which is like this. If you're not familiar, there's a room, I guess one of the larger rooms on a submarine, but it's not very big. Rooms in submarines are pretty small on the most part. Anyway, what this is where the officers have their meals, and then they also, if there's a meeting or something, they hold the meetings and things in this room. It's basically a conference room. Anyway, so okay, so I went straight to the officer's mess, and I went in there, and the captain was sitting at the end of the table. I think he'd just finished lunch. And he saw me. He said, "Oh, Lieutenant, yeah, come on in, have a seat. It's great to see you. I'm glad you're aboard." And I said, "Oh, thank you, sir. I'm the crew's been great, and thank you for having me, and looking forward to doing all I can to make the next voyage a success." And he said, "The reason why you're here is I try to speak to every new member of the crew because I want to share kind of my strategy or what I think is important for people in the crew." And I said, "Oh, that sounds great, sir. I'm happy to hear everything that you have to say." And he said, "Lieutenant, have you ever heard the term? It goes something like a saying that's like, if you're not working to solve a problem, you're part of the problem." And I thought for just a moment. I said, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I have definitely heard that more than once." And all of a sudden, this guy exploded out of his chair, and he slammed his fists on the table. And the next thing I know, his nose is 1 inch from mine, and I can feel spittle coming out of his mouth. "Lieutenant, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. If you're not trying to solve the problem, you are the problem. If you're not trying to solve the problem, you are the problem." And then he started sitting down a little bit. He said, "Do you understand me?" And be absolutely honest with you, I wasn't fully sure what he was getting at, but I said, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I understand. I understand." And he sat down, he calmed down. He said, "Well, that's good, because this is very important to me, obviously. And so as long as you're good with that, you're ready, you're dismissed. If you have any questions, talk to the XO. If you have an open door at my stateroom. If you need to talk to me at any time, of course, come talk to me. But it's good to have you aboard. I look forward to working with you." And I said, "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." And I got up and I left. And right away, of course, I was thinking, "Oh, wow. What?" And I thought about it, and very quickly it dawned upon me that in his experience, in the captain's experience, problems that got worked on, when they got resourced and focused on, they got resolved. So in his mind, the only problems that exist are problems that we as humans allow to exist. And that gets to Harari's point, right? We are capable of doing anything. And so if there are problems that exist, they exist because we allow them to exist. And I have to say that in the 40 years since then, my experience has been the same. That problems that get appropriate resources and attention, they get resolved. And in fact, that's one of the things that the narsoles are doing to us to exploit us, is there are certain, issues that can be very emotional, or they drive emotion into it because that's what they do. And they use it, they try to get us to believe that the resolution is a simple yes or no answer or something like that. And then they pound it into us. They make us, think of other people as evil, or because they don't believe in a simple solution, or they believe yes and we believe no, or whatever the case may be. And so many of the major issues that we talk about and have been talking about for decades now, but even more and more now as the amplification of the propaganda of the hateful stories and everything has exploded, they don't want to resolve. The narsoles in our government don't want to resolve the issues because that's how they control us, how they exploit us. Okay? That's how they control and exploit us. And so we can resolve these issues, abortion rights or gun violence, gun controls, or deficit spending, or, gross economic inequality, or immigration issues, or whatever they are. If we, the extraordinary, ordinary people, would just sit down and work on them and resolve them, pro and con, good and bad, for and against, really work on them, they would get resolved. And so what is the carrot? Why, again, we think about things in the abstract, right? So I'm proposing something here that we're going to start working toward getting extraordinary, ordinary people into our government. So there's going to be a new way of identifying and electing people into our government. And then how they behave is going to be different too. So why go through the effort? Now, this is one of the things that, again, and rightly so, thousands of years ago, we had this idea of, abstract ideas or whatever. But if something was abstract, as in, here's some chicken, that's a real thing, versus I think we can breed chickens and have like an ongoing diet of chicken, which isn't abstract, that's a future thing. And so you're talking, again, thousands of years ago to a leader of your tribe or whatever, and you're trying to convince this person that you shouldn't just run around and kill chickens. You can actually cage them and maybe feed them and then eat them and keep chickens. Raise and eat chickens. Maybe that's a thing that we should consider doing. And again, the tribe is kind of living on the knife's edge, so it's totally appropriate to think about that. But then if you think, wow, I think we can do it, and you try it and it's successful, then there's a huge improvement in how people can live, right? And again, in Harari's book, he talks about how agriculture had that effect. We could raise a lot of food. We could actually grow it instead of kind of randomly trying to find it. And now that contributed to our society and going forward. Anyway, so what are the big pluses, the gems for us to cause us to want to do things differently in the future? Well, it would mean a sea change in the positive in human health. Because there's so many things that our society is doing because of the narsoles out there. We do all kinds of stuff that is not in the best interests of most people, yet we do them. We're out there doing them because there's a ton of money to be made, not in actually curing someone or have them being healthy. Now, money is in giving them drugs or treating them for various ailments or whatever. There's a ton of money in that. And there's a list, I don't want to go on and on, but there would be a huge sea change improvement in human health in general. There would be a sea change, a big improvement in environmental health. So in many areas around the world, so I just got back from a tour, a vacation in Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And in the major cities there, like Bangkok and Hanoi and Da Nang and places like that, there's a lot of pollution, a lot of air pollution, but a lot of pollution in general. And for those of us that are old enough to remember, back in the early 1970s, I think it was the early 70s, I remember, for example, images on the television. I'd never been to Los Angeles yet, but images on the television of Los Angeles and this, gray brown cloud of, it looked like fog, only it was, it was pollution, horrible, horrible, horrible air pollution. And so there was this effort, we with the leadership of our government, we went about this effort to clean up the environment. And there's still to this day, places where like drinking water or something is a problem. And we would resolve those issues if it were us, the extraordinary, ordinary people, figuring out how to do this, how to conquer these issues. Okay? So a sea change improvement in environmental health, there would be an end to gross economic inequality. Not to economic inequality in whole, because the reality is, we have different talents and things, and people that bring like a different level of value to society. And not that any of them shouldn't be valued, but some of the things you and I maybe choose to value more. For example, anyone can go around and pick up some trash, in the streets or whatever. It doesn't take a lot of skill or training or whatever to do that. And so there is definitely value to doing that kind of work, but the value for most of us, we'd say, that's not as high a value as someone who learns how to be a brain surgeon and saves my life or the life of my spouse or the life of my child or whatever. And so clearly the people that, have, really unusual skills or, work exceptionally hard or whatever, they bring more value to society. And so therefore they should have more economic return from that value. But on the other hand, the gross part of it, you get into a place where, again, the narsoles, they convince us that they're worth, $200 billion or $500 billion or $1 trillion or whatever these. No. They are not worth hundreds of billions of dollars. No human on the planet has ever been or will ever be worth hundreds of billions of dollars. So I don't know what the right answer is there, but I know that you and I and the millions of us, we can come to resolve that, to eliminate the horrors of excessive, gross economic inequality. We can have balanced budgets and stable fiscal conditions. So one of the things in our society, for us extraordinary, ordinary people, is things kind of being mostly the same is a good place. You can imagine, so sort of an example, I have moved 26 times. This is something I cannot, recommend to my worst enemy. Well, just imagine if you could never have any kind of home, a place that you said, this is it, this is where I return to, or this is where I rest. Just imagine, what would happen to us if every day I came back to this place and nope, you're not living here, now you're 5 miles away, and then the next night, oh, you're going over here. So stability and then the balanced budget part of it, again, that abstract thinking. So money, money is this abstract thing. Well, you say, well, no, it's not. I can hold it. Well, yes, you can. But money is the miracle of here's a piece of paper or here's a coin, and I can exchange that at a fairly well-known rate of exchange for lots of things. I can go buy a loaf of bread. I can, get a service done. I can get my arm set. I can get the car repaired. I can, whatever, right? And so those pieces of paper and those coins, they have value because we say that they do. And we've kind of agreed amongst all of us, the millions and billions of us on the planet, that those pieces of paper, and even like just numbers logged in the screen, right? They have value now because we control that. We control and verify and believe, and we do, that we keep like those things in a certain well-constructed way so that we can believe in it. So that we can believe, yes, this $10, I can go and I can buy a pie at the grocery store or whatever, 2 pies, whatever it is. But the problem is, and right now, especially here in the United States, we are running budget deficits. And the problem is not that we're doing that, but at some point, we, the extraordinary, ordinary people, might start losing faith that those pieces of paper or coins are more or less worth what they were yesterday or what they'll be worth tomorrow. I mean, okay, they can change a little bit, but if they just start violently changing, and many other countries around the world have had this because their citizens have lost faith in the currency, and so therefore they start charging, imagine if you went to the grocery store tomorrow, instead of buying a can of soup is $2 or whatever, now it's suddenly $150. Bang, overnight. That's going to be a problem. So that's why we need balanced budgets and stable fiscal conditions, because we believe in and must believe in this kind of continuity, so that we can have the great benefit of having money that we can freely exchange for all kinds of things. We will have a sustainable global population and an end to famine. There is, for sure, there is no reason in today's world that there should be anyone on the planet, okay, effectively no one on the planet that would ever go hungry, okay? And that, the global population, it was rising. In theory, it's going to level off, they say, but it's the population has grown by like a factor of 8 in like 100 and something years. It's exploded. And the reality is that this earth, this thing, this wonderful place where we are, it only has so many resources. And it's fair for all of us to expect or want some level of using those resources. And when there's 8 billion, 20 billion, 100 billion people on the planet, that's just not possible. So we, again, the extraordinary, ordinary people, we need to figure out how to slow and then probably reduce the level of global population over time to some, and manage that as we do that, and not by killing people. And all the apocalyptic, there we go, I got it, apocalyptic, scenarios, dystopian scenarios that have been. No, we just say, okay, we think, again, the extraordinary ordinary people, that the level of where people might be fairly comfortable is to have these kinds of resources. And that means that generally, we can have 7 billion people on the planet or 6 billion people, and then all of them should be able to enjoy a fairly reasonable life, with the resources or whatever. Anyway, so we would have that, a sustainable global population. And last but not least, we would have an end to border conflicts, war, and warfare. So one of the things, and again, it's been going on for centuries and centuries and centuries. In Europe, they were having wars all the time. All the time. All the time. And not just World War I and World War II. For centuries, there was wars and wars and wars and wars and wars. And around the globe, okay? And what causes that? Well, it's always the narsoles convincing the people that this arbitrary line isn't in the right place, or there's resources that this other group has that, we just are going to go take because we want to. And, and the list goes on and on. And the poster child for this in the modern times is the Putin invasion of Ukraine. Now, you notice I said the Putin invasion of Ukraine because Vladimir Putin, he and he alone, along with some of his cronies that probably also profit from it, have decided that they're going to kill their own citizens, extraordinary, ordinary people like you and I. They're going to try to run them across the border into Ukraine, to kill the Ukrainians, to take over that land. And it's Putin, Vladimir Putin and his cronies, and they are doing this. And the Russians, of course, unfortunately, as the narsoles have done for centuries and centuries and centuries, they have gotten enough support from the common, extraordinary, ordinary people that this invasion has been going on, and this war has been going on for over 3 years now. But that is a poster child for that specific thing. Border conflicts, war and warfare, the Middle East, we will resolve the Middle East, the extraordinary, ordinary people, if we can get the narsoles out of there, which we can, because it's a 20-to-1 ratio or 25-to-1 ratio. We can get rid of these people. So how? Okay, so that's the benefit to doing this. So how are we going about doing it? Well, there's many things that we need to do because we have to unite in a consensus for what we need to do. Remember, when we work together, when there's a consensus on what we need to do, we can do anything. So the first thing I want to say is it would help us to have a story that takes us from where we are to where we will be, this great place that we will be, and how we might get there. Because, again, it's the vision of, how to get to the moon. Or, thousands and thousands of years ago, do we start, raising our own chickens? These kinds of things, right? So here's where we are. Here's this better place where we could be. And then in order to get people to do these things in a coordinated way, right? We need everyone to think, yeah, this is a thing. We can do this. So back in the 1980s, a guy named or Goldratt, I'm not sure how he pronounces his name, he wrote a book about manufacturing efficiency. And it was wildly popular in industry. And it talked about, manufacturing efficiency and stuff like that. And so he, wrote this book, and it was a proposal on things to make things better. But it wasn't a normal business book. It didn't have charts and theories and equations and all this other stuff. What it had was a fictional story where you had people and all the suffering that they were having. So customer service reps and customers and plant supervisors and company leadership and community members and all this other stuff. You had this going on and the current suffering because of the bad way things were. And then you had a guy come in and gave them some principles, and they started acting on them, and things started getting better. And they got better, and they acted on more, and they did more, and they got better at doing those better things. And pretty soon, they had this great new place, and everyone was far happier. Customer service reps and customers and the community and the tax base and on and on and on and on and on. So he used this concept of a fictional storyline to help people understand where we are now, how we proceed, and where we can be. And this, in fact, is why I'm making this presentation, is part of that for you. But we can do better in that we can have a novel, a book, and I'm calling it Freedom, Equality, and Fairness, a brief history of Citizen Statesmen, of the Citizen Statesman movement. So the thing about it is, this book is our book. This book is our book, not my book. It's ours. And the author, I'm using a little play on words here, der myriad Mann. So in German, der Mann is literally like the man. And myriad is a word that's in English, but I think there's other languages it's also in. It comes from the Greek and means many, many. But there's also kind of a connotation of many different. So this is us, the extraordinary, ordinary people, envisioning, using our abstract thinking capabilities, envisioning, here's where we are, here's where we want to be, and here's how we can get there. So I thought you might like to hear the beginning of the book and the end. Okay? So here's the synopsis of the storyline. Looking back from the year 2056, an author, writing anonymously for fear of personal repercussions, reveals the stories of courage and will of handfuls of extraordinary, ordinary people. People who rose up from nowhere to lead sweeping changes that occurred in less than 3 decades, between June 2025 and June 2053. These times were defined by incredible political and economic upheaval and intrigue, as initial handfuls of common citizens were joined by millions, and eventually billions, of their peers in embracing seemingly small but critical changes in how they thought and how they lived in support of freedom, equality, and fairness. These were indeed extraordinary times, when a world in disarray, on the brink of abandoning democracy in favor of autocratic rule in every region of the globe, collectively resolved instead to forge a much better future. It was time for a rebirth of democracy. And as history would reveal, that rebirth did not come a moment too soon. This period was marked by massive, even existential challenges, and, thankfully, by substantial, creative, reasoned, and reasonable responses to them. During this incredible period, the White House of the United States was nuked by a foreign adversary. In a sudden turnaround, Russia was the first of the world's countries to adopt citizen statesmen as their leaders, becoming one of the strongest democracies almost overnight. And famously, the President of the United States leapt onto a hand grenade thrown into the middle of a riot and lived, arguably even thrived, even after his body was launched meters into the air when the grenade exploded. The stories behind the major events that unfolded are brimming with personal and political intrigue. You will find yourself fascinated by them, by the often stoic, always heroic people who braved so much and, by doing so, made huge differences in how the world would now revolve on its axis. This work is a tribute to them, to the first generations of citizen statesmen. Still here in the beginning, the preface. God willing, you'll never know who I am. Der Myriadman, a pen name. I will not reveal anything about myself, as that information would help you, and more importantly, my many wealthy or otherwise powerful enemies, to find me. Therefore, for reasons of personal safety, I think it is important that you don't know or find me. There is a place, the place, where, in my imagination anyway, I go to write and edit novels. The place is under an imaginary pine tree, on a mythical small cove on the otherwise very real and transcendently beautiful island of Majorca off the coast of Spain. This pine is the largest here, and it stands above the others nearby, its huge and twisted trunk somehow anchoring it into the copious rock and minimal soil in which it grows. It seems to stand as if by miracle, with seemingly all of its mass tipped and overhanging the nearby sea. The water here breaking against the coast is a mix of blue and turquoise, so beautiful that it seems completely unreal, which it happens to be, ironically enough. Various boats, both under sail and under power, navigate the waters nearby, never close enough to notice my presence on the shore under my beloved tree. I watch them and the people on board from time to time, pleasant breaks from the toils of writing. There's always a breeze here, coming off the Mediterranean, bringing air off the water to mitigate the heat in summer and the cold in winter. The place always affords some protection from the sun or from the rain as desired. Most often, almost always, that protection is welcome. Yet at times, I deliberately forego it to feel the sun or the rain directly, because sometimes that feels good too. The place is perfect because I imagine it so. That's the miracle of the imagination. You can think of just about anything and it can be true. It can come to be, at least at some level, right? And sometimes, far from never and further still from always, the visions in our imaginations, through effort, are converted into reality. So I choose to imagine a perfect place, the place, to write my books, just as I choose to imagine a far better future for us all. And I beg you to imagine that better future with me. We can have that, you know, a far better future. It starts by us, you and I, imagining a much better way forward, followed by the injection of almost trivial amounts of willpower and effort for and by each of us. We can imagine, then make a way forward, creating that better place, that better future. Let us then explore our past and our futures together. So then the story goes on, and I was a big fan of Tom Clancy back in the day when his first novels came out, and there's a character, Jack Ryan, that was kind of a constant through a handful of his first novels. And Jack Ryan just kind of happened into things and did things that needed to be done. And a friend of mine gave me a few novels by Clive Cussler, and he has a similar character named Dirk Pitt. And so several of Clive Cussler's novels have this character, Dirk Pitt. Well, this novel, Freedom, Equality, Fairness, it has a character, Mark Allen Rittenhouse. And Mark Rittenhouse has been going through all of these things as one of the characters, sometimes a minor character, but a character that's kind of gone through all this over the years. And now he's in the, what is it now, a rebuilt capital in the U.S. And he is approached by a reporter, a young reporter. Mark, you finally decided to step away from the spotlight. Certainly at 91 years of age, you deserve to do so. But having said that, why now? What do you want to do now? The young Washington correspondent from the Chicago Tribune held a recording microphone loosely in his right hand between them. Out of habit, he tilted the microphone slightly in Mark's direction, expectedly, even though he knew logically that microphone technology had long since made these motions completely unnecessary. Hell. It is hell, right? I just feel that it's time. I've been leaning that way for many years, to be honest. I'm just tired at this point. Too tired to do anything but rest and relax. And we're in good hands, I know. The able, reasoned, reasonable, compassionate hands of our friends and neighbors, the hands of our fellow citizen statesmen. Not just here, but in almost 120 nations around the globe. So I feel that I've accomplished far more than what I set up to do 30 years ago. Mark paused for a moment, pondering. Funny that it feels as an eternity one moment, and as I reflect upon it, an instant later as if I'd just started. Have you read Harari's Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind? Mark asked Hal Holcrain, looking him directly in the eyes with eyebrows raised comically high as he waited for an answer. Yes, I have, Hal shot back, suddenly smiling broadly. You have been recommending that for years, and as you asserted over the last decades, it actually made it into mandatory reading lists at many schools, including 2 of mine. Mark grinned like a Cheshire cat and quipped, Ha! Then you asked the wrong question, yeah? We humans can do, and have shown we can do, anything we collectively agree to do, both good and, unfortunately, bad. I agree with Harari. We could ask ourselves what we want to do, but the much better question is this. What do we want to want? Still grinning broadly, Mark let go his cane, letting it lean against his thigh, and reached up with both hands, gripping Hal firmly on both shoulders. Thank God we've stumbled upon the answer. Freedom, equality, and fairness. And with these words still echoing in the marbled entrance to the Capitol building, Mark snatched up his cane and quickly turned for the doors. Moments later, he had disappeared amongst the tourists and government employees milling about and was never again seen in public. The epilogue. Mark Allen Rittenhouse still graces this earth as I write this. He was a significant contributor to these books as he graciously sat for dozens of hours of personal interviews. He agreed with my attempt to use these novels to get you to suspect that he and I were one and the same, thereby providing me with some added security. Cannot help but wonder if it worked. In any case, when I saw him last, he asked me to relate one last message to you, my readers. Really, how could I refuse? I'm 95 now. It's hard to get around without assistance these days. My doctors tell me that I just missed the window of opportunity where some of the newest medical innovations would partially regenerate me physically and mentally. They were prescribed and applied per the protocols, but they've had little effect in my case. Thankfully, the latest generation of exoskin garments can be tuned to offer endurance in use and are easier than ever to recharge and pull on and off. I wear mine nearly every day these days because I still love walking in nice weather and fending for myself, even if it's the skin that is my helper in actually doing much of the walking, balancing, and lifting. The latest UN Secretary General has been gracious about gifting me the use of one of the newest of these fabulous devices, even as the overhead monitoring and protection drone coverage has ended, at my request. You see, it makes little sense to expend considerable resources to protect that which cannot be, and therefore should not be, preserved. Despite the tendency of some to think of me in glowing terms, it wasn't me that did a single damn thing of any consequence. No, as sure as there's a nose on your face and air on this planet to breathe, the accomplishments of the last few decades aren't mine. They are yours. Millions, no billions of you around the globe now have devoted a few hours each month to promoting and protecting freedom, equality, and fairness. By now, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of you that have accepted and embraced the challenges of serving in your governments as citizen statesmen. You and you alone have each done so much to excise hate, corruption, and malfeasance around the globe. You will be leaving the world in a much better place than when you entered it. And we, all of us, can't possibly thank you enough. No one gets more depressed than me when they think of Tatiana and Mary Beth and how this life treated them so cruelly in the end. If I might ask a favor, it would be to have you remember and eulogize these two women. The first, I'm convinced, singularly enabled the Russian people to throw off the chains of decades of autocratic rule, so they now bask in the glow and comfort offered by fair and effective representative government. The second enthusiastically accepted the weight of leadership we were about to put upon her shoulders. We can only imagine the great things she would have accomplished if she had been allowed by circumstances to live a full life. Hers would have been a life unfinished if it were not for the exemplary actions of those that followed in her footsteps, who vowed that her memory would never be allowed to fade. I've always thought that the best way to pass from this earth is to just wake up dead one day. At 95, that day can't be too far ahead. So I leave you with two final thoughts. First, I love you, each and every one. And until my last breath and beyond, freedom, equality, fairness. So that's the story, the arc of the story, the beginning and the end. And it's up to us. It's up to us now to write the middle. It's up to the extraordinary, ordinary people like you and I to fill in the middle of the story. Now, we're also going to need a constitutional amendment because back in going back to the Constitution, so back in the late 1700s, we had this thing called the Articles of Confederation, and and representatives were sent from the colonies to fix that, to make it better. Well, it was very quickly they came to the conclusion that they needed to start over, basically. And so they wrote the Constitution amongst themselves. And this was really a very dramatic time over the weeks that they met. And in fact, some of the delegates left. Some of them left permanently because convinced that they were creating treason or basically being treasonous. but our Constitution was put together nonetheless. Well, during that Constitutional Convention, there was definite debate about, who could vote and who, could be in office, and how candidates might be identified and how they might be elected, and there was a lot of that going on. But more or less, they couldn't really resolve it in any detailed way. So there's, like I say, the Constitution is a framework. So there's actually very little in it about how we identify and elect officials into our government offices. But clearly there was a huge concern over the influence of political parties and such, because Washington, when he left office, he left a long exit letter. I'm not calling it the right terms, but anyway, he wrote this lengthy letter talking about his concerns about the country going forward, and a huge part of it is devoted to the horrific influence of political parties and such. So we need a constitutional amendment to make sure that we get citizen statesmen in our government. And so it's going to parallel, the actual process is going to parallel jury duty. So again, in the big picture, there's roughly 600 elected people at our federal level. And so like jury duty, we'll get a pool randomly selected from around the country of maybe 10 times that number. And then just like jury duty, they're compelled to present themselves. And then the rest of us, instead of a judge and lawyers looking at them and vetting them, the rest of us will look at their resumes and stuff, and we will vet them, and we'll decide some of these are better than others. And so we'll use ranked choice voting, and we'll raise up some, and others that don't make the cut, well, they'll be just sent back home. And then the ones, the very top, for maybe there's 2 or 3 or 4 candidates for each office, we'll ranked choice vote for them, and then whoever gets the most votes will be the first person in office, and something happens to them, whether it's death or serious illness, or maybe they act in some way that isn't in the best interests of the country, and therefore are expelled from the office, then there's a second person ready to come in and fill in behind them. And all of those people will affirm their duty to the rest of us. So here is a potential oath that they would take every year in office. I affirm and embrace the tenets of freedom, equality, and fairness, and the fiduciary duties incumbent upon me to serve the citizens of a nation founded upon these pillars. I shall serve and protect the people of the United States in totality against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to the best of my abilities. I shall not accept gifts, employment, positions of authority, other forms of compensation, or other items of value from any source that could be perceived to influence my service to the people. When or where there's a conflict in interests, I will publicly declare any conflicts known to me and serve the people holistically over my own interests or the specialized interests of coalitions, groups, political parties, or industries tied to or associated with me. I acknowledge and embrace that service to the citizens of this country is a solemn and noble commitment. My failure to sufficiently uphold the tenets of freedom, equality, and fairness, or to otherwise fail to serve the people with integrity and compassion, can be grounds for Congress or the Department of Justice, representing the people, to charge me with treason, the penalties for treason being appropriately harsh as determined by a jury of my peers. We can also have a series of national symposiums, one of them to help us really vet and fulfill this amendment that we'll need for the Constitution, but also to actually solve and resolve some of these major issues before us. And I call it the Schedule of 340. So there's roughly 340 million people in the country. So like jury duty or like Citizen Statesmen, we'll randomly select from the populations around the country, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times that number, and then we'll vet them, and then we'll have 340, 350 people go to national symposiums on the different issues, not necessarily the same 350, in fact, more likely not the same 340, 350, and they will consider those issues, pro and con, good and bad, for and against, and they'll propose resolution for those issues, and then they'll propose legislation for those issues, and then we'll enact those proposed resolutions with a sunset clause of whatever years, and then we'll review those issues again, and we'll go through the same process. And step by step, the major issues again, like abortion rights or gun control or deficit spending or whatever, they will get resolved by not by the partisan chaos that we have now, but by extraordinary, ordinary people working together to resolve the issues. We'll need a bunch of representatives that believe in a citizen statesman movement that will take that word out to the rest of the country. So back during the civil rights movement, of course, the most famous person is Martin Luther King. But there was dozens of other people that worked with Martin Luther King to, build support, to communicate, to help people understand the civil rights issues and why things needed to change. And those people fanned out across the country to do that, to have those communications. We have to have an absolute devotion to problem resolution over partisanship. This goes back to, having these national symposiums and focus on problem resolution. Solve and resolve, as my captain said, you've got to be part of the solution. We can do these things. The issues before us are complex. The solutions are also complex, but nothing that we cannot do. Here's an example. Our traffic rules, right? Our complex traffic rules. There are thousands and thousands of rules and regulations like lane markings and speed limits and traffic signs and safety standards and licensing requirements and on and on and on and on and on. Thousands and thousands and thousands of rules and regulations. Why? Because every day millions of us take to our cars and vehicles, and we go from one place to another with no prior planning or coordination whatsoever. And those complex rules for traffic secure the blessings of free and independent travel for each and every one of us, each and every day, precisely because they are complex. Now just think for a moment if our traffic rules and regulations were to get politicized like so many other issues like abortion rights and stuff like that. So they could become these partisan issues submerged in oceans of propaganda. Suddenly, half the cars are red, half the cars are blue. The drivers in all of them are furious at all times. You goose-stepping Nazi racist prick, get out of my way. You pinko commie baby-eating bastard, you ain't going nowhere. And the last thing that we need, but absolutely, that we absolutely need, is full transparency. an absolute commitment to full transparency. Again, these national symposiums, they're open to the public. It's televised, recorded. All of the papers presented are available for anyone to see. The resolution of the issues does not occur in, shady, dark rooms with smoking, cigars and all that other crap. No, we have full transparency. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And if you want to know more, here's even more information. And that's the thing about the Citizen Statesman initiative, the movement, and us finally fixing this. It's going to happen. I can tell you, as sure as there's a nose on your face, as sure as there's air on this planet to breathe, it's going to happen. It's not if, it's when. And when is that going to happen? That depends on you. Just how bad do things need to get? Just how bad? How many millions must die? How many hundreds of thousands or millions must starve? How bad does the gross economic inequality, how bad does it have to get? How bad do you have to be before you finally say, I've had enough? I'll tell you, I'm there. I'm there. And I think millions and millions, and I'm hoping hundreds of millions of you, and billions around the planet are there too. Just as examples, again, for the United States in the 1770s, colonists began to fight for what was considered to be the unthinkable. They talked about and fought for throwing off the most powerful military and economic empire in the world up to that point. And for the hundreds and thousands of people that said, yes, we need to do this, there were hundreds of people that said, are you crazy? Are you insane? You can't possibly believe that we can overcome the British Army and their finances and their military force. We can't possibly do it. But we can. We can do the unthinkable. In the 1840s, so again, the Constitution, our U.S. Constitution was far from perfect. Still today is not perfect. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, not a perfect union, a more perfect union. We, the people, perfect the union. And the original Constitution was put together and it was agreed to, and it was a major compromise. There were many things that today we look back and think that was a terrible, horrible compromise. But at the time, it was the best that those delegates could do. The best that the extraordinary, ordinary people could put together. And back in that time, women were not allowed to vote. They had no voice in their futures or the future of their country. So in the 1840s, so 60, 70 years after the country was formed, women began to argue for what was at that time an unconscionable thought. Even in that time, women should have, they should have, the right to have influence on their future. This was unconscionable. But by 1920, the Constitution was amended, and women had fought for and gotten the right to vote, which they've had ever since. It's a long time. 80, 70, 80 years. But they were successful. The question is not if, it's when. In the 1960s, people of color demanded an end to inequality. So in the southern part of the country, mostly, but other parts of the country too, but mostly in the South, there were these, Jim Crow laws and, separate but equal and all this, all the segregation and all these other things. But it was not equal and it was not fair. It simply was not equal. It was not fair that people were treated solely because of the color of their skin. And so I mentioned Martin Luther King. He and others started banding together and talking through and gathering support and gathering consensus. This is how we are going to solve and resolve this issue. And someday, maybe in the next few years, maybe thousands of years from now, we the people will end the malignant reign of the narsoles. We will do this thing. The question is not if. The question is when. Are you ready? I am. It's time. It's time. It's time to move. It's time to go. It's time to congregate, to coalesce, to form that vision, and then act to implement that vision. To use our imaginations to see a better way forward and to do it. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union for the United States. We, the people, perfect the union. We do. No one's going to do it for us. Certainly not the narsoles. Certainly not the narsoles. It's us, the extraordinary, ordinary people. We are the people that will do this. No one will do this for us. And it's always been us. It's always been up to us. And honestly, and I've explained why we have allowed ourselves to be exploited. I've given you the understanding, the self-understanding of why, of how this has come to be. Okay? And now that we have that knowledge, now that we have that understanding of why this is happening to us and how it's happening to us, now it's time for us to say, okay, we're done. We're moving on. We're doing a new thing. Remember the thought experiment with Einstein, right? He also is credited for, I think there's people that debate whether he really said this or not, but he's credited with saying the true definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different outcome. We've been doing the same thing. We've been allowing narsoles to fill the roles in our government, whether it be kings or representatives in our democracies or whatever. We've been allowing narsoles to fulfill those roles for centuries and centuries and centuries. And we, the extraordinary, ordinary people, have suffered so much more than we should have, or that we will going forward if we finally take the initiative to fix it. to solve and resolve. So I invite you, take my hand in the hands of your neighbors and your friends and your work colleagues. Let's walk hand in hand, arm in arm, to a new, brighter, better tomorrow. So join the movement. You can search YouTube for freedom, equality, and fairness, or much easier, just use the QR code. Scan that with your phone. It'll take you to the website or to the channel. Watch, like, share, subscribe. I've talked about using this video as a podcast. So do that. Listen to it. You can go back and listen to portions of it if you need to. But then I strongly encourage you, have your families, your friends, your neighbors sit and listen to this as a podcast as well. And contact us. Email the movement at freeequalfair@gmail.com. It's up to us. It's always been about us.